Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be diving into this pretty controversial book,
Yeah.
The Creature from Jekyll Island.
Oh, yeah.
It's about central banking, specifically the Federal Reserve.
It's a deep dive
Yeah.
into the Fed.
So we're going to try to understand how central banking impacts, our lives
Right.
and the economy. And
Absolutely.
this book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, it doesn't really hold back.
No, it doesn't pull any punches.
It's got a very strong perspective, and some would say conspiracy theory
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
style.
So,
So
get ready.
yeah. So this book argues that the Federal Reserve
Okay.
is actually bad for the economy
Okay.
and that it's not really looking out for the average person.
Okay, so how does it make that argument?
Well, it starts off with a bang,
Okay.
setting the stage with a secret meeting
A secret meeting.
on Jekyll Island
Oh.
back in 1910.
Okay, this is like a conspiracy thriller now.
Yeah, it kind of is.
Okay.
It's a very captivating book.
So imagine like a group of super powerful bankers
Okay.
and politicians like Senator Nelson Aldrich,
Mm-hmm.
who basically was representing like big businesses.
Mm-hmm.
They all sneak off to this private island.
Wow.
They were so secretive that like Paul Warburg,
Okay.
who was a key figure in this whole meeting,
Okay.
disguised himself as a duck hunter.
Wow. Okay, so they were not messing around?
No, they weren't messing around at all.
But why all the secrecy? What were they trying to hide?
Well, that is a central question that the book raises.
Okay.
So this meeting, this clandestine meeting on Jekyll Island,
Yeah.
this is where the framework for the Federal Reserve System was created
Okay.
with no public input, no transparency.
So the book is saying that this lack of transparency is like a red flag from the get-go?
Exactly.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
secrecy is why there's so much distrust of the Fed today.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, right? When
Right.
something happens in the shadows, people get suspicious.
Yeah, and conspiracy theories flourish in darkness.
Exactly. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. Before we get into all the, the juicy conspiracy stuff,
Right.
how does the Federal Reserve actually work?
Okay, so the book spends a lot of time on this.
Yeah.
It starts with this concept called fractional reserve banking.
Okay.
And it's pretty mind-bending
Okay.
when you really think about it.
Okay.
So basically, banks only need to keep a fraction
Okay.
of their deposits
Mm.
on hand as reserves,
Okay.
which means that they can lend out way more money
Okay.
than they actually have.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
They can lend out money that they don't have.
Yes. That's the crazy thing.
Okay, how does that even work?
So the book calls this the Mandrake mechanism.
The Mandrake mechanism.
A pretty cool name.
Yeah.
It's this process where the Fed essentially creates money
Okay.
from government debt.
From government debt. Okay. So explain that a little bit more.
So imagine this, right?
Yeah.
The government issues bonds,
Oh, yeah.
borrow money.
Okay, I'm with you.
Then the Fed comes in and buys these bonds with newly created money.
Okay.
And then that new money gets injected into the banking system,
Mm-hmm.
allowing banks to lend out even more money.
Okay, so more government borrowing means more money that the Fed just creates?
Yeah, that's the basic idea.
Okay.
And the book argues that this is a recipe for disaster.
I mean, it sounds kind of sketchy. Okay, so what kind of disaster are we talking about?
Well, the book claims that this whole system inevitably leads to inflation.
Inflation.
Yeah, because you're increasing the money supply
Okay.
without necessarily increasing the amount of goods and services in the economy.
Okay, so more money chasing the same amount of stuff
Big.
equals higher prices.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Right. It's pretty basic economics.
Yeah. Well, some people would argue that a little inflation is actually healthy,
Sure.
right? Like for economic growth.
That's a common argument.
Yeah.
And the book actually addresses this head on.
Okay.
It claims that the Fed's meddling
Okay.
actually creates these artificial booms and busts,
I,
leading to instability
okay.
and hurting the average person in the long run.
So it's not real growth.
Exactly. It's like pumping air into a balloon.
Okay.
It looks bigger and more impressive for a while,
Mm-hmm.
but eventually it's going to pop.
And when that balloon pops, who gets left holding the pieces?
Well, according to the book,
Yeah.
it's the taxpayers and the depositors.
Oh, so the average person
Yeah, the average person ends up footing the bill.
for the Fed's mistakes.
Exactly.
So like those massive bailouts during the financial crisis.
Yes. Those are a perfect example.
The book mentions a bunch of those, right?
It does, yeah.
Like Penn Central Railroad and
Yep, Penn Central Railroad.
what was the other one? New York City?
Yeah, New York City Chrysler.
Chrysler.
All these examples
Yeah.
to show how the Fed's actions, like bailing out these failing companies,
Mm-hmm.
often benefits the very institutions that caused the problems in the first place.
So it's like a rigged game where the banks always win.
Yeah, and the rest of us lose.
Yeah. Okay.
And it gets even more interesting when the book dives into this whole history
Okay.
of central banking and fiat money.
Oh, yeah.
Did you know that the Founding Fathers
Yeah.
were vehemently against central banking?
I mean, that makes sense. They saw firsthand the dangers of a system where the government could just print money.
Exactly. They
Yeah.
didn't want to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Like that whole continental dollar debacle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was a disaster.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating
Yeah.
how we went from a system of sound money
Right.
backed by gold and silver
Yeah.
to this current system
Yeah.
we have,
Right.
fiat money and central banking.
It's wild.
Makes you wonder how we ended up here.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've got this secret origin story,
Right.
potentially rigged system,
Yeah.
and this backdrop of, financial failures throughout history.
Yeah, it's a pretty grim picture so far.
Yeah, so where does the book go from here?
Well, buckle up, because this is where things get really controversial.
Yeah.
The creature from Jekyll Island introduces this theory called the Rothschild formula.
The Rothschild formula.
Yeah, have you heard of this?
I've heard the name Rothschild, but I don't know what the formula is.
So it claims that these international financiers,
Okay.
particularly the Rothschild banking dynasty,
Okay.
actually benefit from war.
Benefit from war.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they supposedly manipulate events to, instigate conflicts.
Wow.
And then they lend money to governments to fund these wars,
Okay.
and then they profit off the interest.
So they're making money off of the suffering of others.
Yeah, that's the basic idea.
That's pretty dark.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so is there any evidence to support this?
So the book uses some historical examples,
Okay.
like Nathan Rothschild's
Okay.
supposed manipulation of the bond market after the Battle of Waterloo.
Oh, wow.
It also talks about the financing of the Bolshevik Revolution,
Okay.
implying that Western financiers helped fund the rise of communism.
So is the book saying that there's some secret cabal controlling the world through war and finance?
It definitely lays out a case that makes you think.
Yeah.
It connects these historical events,
Okay.
these financial maneuvers, to suggest that there is a system
Okay.
that benefits a select few
Mm-hmm.
at the expense of everyone else.
So if this Rothschild formula is even partially true, what does that mean for us?
That's a question the book really wants you to ponder.
Yeah.
It forces us to think critically
Yeah.
about who's really in control
Yeah.
and what their motives might be.
So we've got this shadowy group potentially pulling strings,
Right.
and we've got this central bank that might be working against our best interests.
Yeah. So far, it's not looking so good.
No, but where do we go from here? What does the creature from Jekyll Island propose we actually do about all of this?
Well, that's what we'll dive into next.
Mm-hmm.
The book actually offers some pretty radical solutions,
Okay.
but we'll get to those after we come back.
All right, sounds good. I'm intrigued. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Sounds good. Before the break, we were talking about some pretty heavy stuff, like these secret meetings and this potentially rigged system and this whole theory about financiers profiting from war.
Yeah, the creature from Jekyll Island doesn't stop there. It connects the Federal Reserve to these global institutions,
Yeah.
like the IMF and the World Bank.
Right, and it doesn't really paint a pretty picture
Yeah.
of their impact,
Yeah.
especially on developing countries.
Yeah, I mean, the book argues that these institutions actually impose policies that, keep those countries trapped in debt and poverty.
Yeah, it's almost like a new form of colonialism,
Yeah.
where these countries are forced to rely on loans and aid
Mm-hmm.
that ultimately benefit Western interests.
So it's like they're forced to play by somebody else's rules.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it gets even more unsettling when the book brings up this idea of a new world order.
Okay, now we're getting into serious conspiracy theory territory.
Well, the book presents it as more than just a theory. It suggests that these international financial institutions are all part of a larger plan
Yeah,
to create a global system of control
yeah.
where national sovereignty is eroded and a small elite is dictating the fate of the world.
It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel.
Right. But the book argues that this plan is already in motion,
Oh, wow.
citing examples like the Bretton Woods Agreement,
Okay.
which established the IMF and the World Bank.
Yeah.
It points to the push for globalization, the erosion of national borders, the increasing interconnectedness of the global economy
Mm-hmm.
as evidence that we're moving towards this new world order.
Okay, so what does that mean for the average person? Are we just headed towards a future where we're all just cogs in this global machine?
That's a question the book raises. and it's one that deserves serious consideration. It challenges us to think critically about the forces that are shaping our world
Yeah.
and the potential consequences of the decisions being made by those in power.
Okay, so we've got this potential global conspiracy. We've got a central bank that might be working against us, and we've got a future that honestly looks pretty bleak.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
Yeah, but the creature from Jekyll Island doesn't just leave us hanging.
Right.
It actually proposes a solution.
It does, and it's a pretty radical one.
Okay, lay it on me.
The book argues that the only way to truly break free from this system is to abolish the Federal Reserve.
Abolish the Fed.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big step.
It is.
How do we even begin to do that?
Well, the book lays out a multi-step plan.
Okay.
The first step he calls stopping the binge,
Okay.
which essentially means cutting off the Fed's ability to just create money out of thin air.
So no more mandrake mechanism.
Exactly. No more conjuring up money based on government debt.
Okay, I like it. What's next?
So the book proposes freezing the current supply of Federal Reserve notes.
Okay.
No more printing money,
Yeah.
and then redefining the dollar.
Redefining the dollar. What does that even mean?
It means tying the dollar back to something tangible, something with intrinsic value.
Okay.
Like the author suggests, going back to a silver standard.
Like bringing back silver dollars. It sounds like we're going back in time.
Yeah, it kind of does. But wouldn't that make the dollar vulnerable to fluctuations in the price of silver?
That's a good point.
The book suggests a dual system where gold can be substituted for silver at a ratio determined by the free market.
Okay, so let the market decide.
Exactly, not some arbitrary government decree.
That makes a lot more sense.
But what about all the debt that's already out there?
Oh, yeah.
Both government and private debt.
That's a mountain of debt.
Yep.
How do we deal with that if we get rid of the Fed?
Well, that's one of the biggest challenges that the book acknowledges.
Yeah.
It proposes a combination of approaches,
Okay.
like gradually reducing government spending, returning to balanced budgets, and shifting away from debt-based financing.
Those all sound like good ideas.
They do.
But it seems like our government is like addicted to spending and debt.
Yeah. It's a systemic problem, and the book doesn't sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
It argues that we have to break free from this addiction if we want a truly stable and sustainable economic future.
So no more kicking the can down the road.
Exactly. We have to face the music sooner or later.
Okay, so we stop printing money, we redefine the dollar, we tackle the debt. What about the banks themselves? How would they even function in this new system without a central bank, like, controlling everything?
That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
The book proposes a radical shift to what it calls honest banking.
Honest banking. Okay, I like the sound of that already.
So under honest banking, banks would be required to hold 100% reserves against demand deposits.
100% reserves. Wait, didn't we talk about how fractional reserve banking, where banks lend out most of their deposits, is how they create money?
Exactly. And that's
Yeah.
precisely what the book wants to eliminate.
Okay.
It argues that fractional reserve banking is inherently fraudulent.
Okay.
And the root cause of many of the problems that we see in the financial system.
So if I deposit $100 in a bank under this system, they have to keep all $100 on hand.
Yes, instead of lending out $90 of it.
Wow. Okay, so no more creating money out of thin air.
Exactly. Banks would have to actually possess the money
Okay.
before lending it out.
It sounds like a much more stable system.
It does.
But is it realistic?
Well, that's where the debate gets heated.
Okay.
Critics argue that this would stifle economic growth,
Okay.
making it harder for businesses to access capital.
Okay.
They claim that without fractional reserve banking, the economy would just grind to a halt.
So it's like a trade-off, stability versus potential growth?
That's the dilemma. But the book argues that true economic growth comes from savings and investment,
Okay.
not from debt and credit creation.
Okay.
A system of honest banking,
Mhm.
it claims, would encourage savings and channel them into productive investment,
Okay.
leading to sustainable growth.
It's a compelling argument, but it definitely goes against what we're normally told.
Right. It challenges conventional economic thinking.
The creature from Jekyll Island acknowledges that a transition away from the Fed wouldn't be easy, right?
Well, absolutely not. It anticipates a period of adjustment and potential disruption, even calling it the hangover.
Hangover. So it's like detoxing from this addiction to easy money and central bank intervention.
Exactly. And detoxing is never fun.
So it sounds like it's going to be rough.
It wouldn't be painless. But the book argues that this hangover is unavoidable, whether we choose to address the problem now or later.
So better to bite the bullet now and deal with it?
Exactly, than to kick the can down the road and make the eventual consequences even worse.
That makes sense. The book claims that this hangover is temporary, though, right?
Yeah. It says once the economy adapts to a sound money system, it would experience renewed growth and prosperity,
Oh,
free from the artificial boons and busts engineered by the Fed.
it's a very hopeful vision for sure, but for the average person, what practical steps can we take to navigate this potential transition and protect ourselves?
Well, the book stresses the importance of understanding the nature of money and the dangers of fiat currencies.
So knowledge is power in this case.
Absolutely. The more you understand about the financial system,
Yeah.
the better equipped you are to make informed decisions.
So do your own research, pay attention, and don't just blindly trust what the so-called experts are telling you.
Exactly. The book also encourages diversifying your assets,
Okay.
holding a portion of your wealth in tangible assets like precious metals, real estate, or productive businesses.
So don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially if that basket is denominated in a fiat currency, that might be losing value.
That makes sense. What else?
It also recommends reducing debt, living within your means, and building a financial cushion
Okay.
to weather potential economic storms.
So becoming financially resilient, less dependent on the system, and more in control of your own destiny.
Exactly. And finally, the book stresses the importance of community.
Community.
Yeah, building networks of support and cooperation to help each other through challenging times.
It's a good reminder that we're not alone in this.
We're all in this together.
We can overcome these challenges by working together and supporting each other.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've explored a lot of the arguments and the evidence laid out in this book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. We talked about the secret meeting, this potentially rigged system, even that theory about, profiting from war.
And we've seen how the book connects the Fed to those global institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, and it paints a pretty unsettling picture, especially for developing countries.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder if there is any hope for a better system.
Right, one that's more fair, more stable.
Yeah.
Well, that's where the book takes a turn and starts talking about solutions,
Okay.
and they're not what you might expect.
Okay.
The Creature from Jekyll Island proposes something pretty radical,
Okay. I'm ready.
abolishing the Federal Reserve entirely.
Abolishing the Fed. That's a bold move. How would we even go about doing that?
The author actually lays out a multi-step plan.
Okay.
The first step he calls it stopping the binge,
Stopping the binge.
which basically means cutting off the Fed's ability to create money out of thin air.
So no more of that mandrake mechanism.
Exactly. No more conjuring up money based on government debt.
So what would that look like in practice?
So the book proposes freezing the current supply of Federal Reserve notes, no more printing money,
Okay.
and then redefining the dollar.
Redefining the dollar.
Yeah.
How do we redefine the dollar?
It means tying the dollar back to something tangible, something with intrinsic value like gold or silver.
So like bringing back the gold standard.
Exactly. Or a silver standard. The author actually suggests a dual system where gold can be substituted for silver at a ratio determined by the free market.
So instead of the government fixing the price of gold or silver, we just let the market decide.
Exactly. Let the market forces determine the value.
That makes sense. But what about all the debt that's already out there? Both government and private debt. I mean, we're talking about trillions of dollars. How do we deal with that if we abolish the Fed?
That's one of the biggest challenges the book acknowledges. It proposes a combination of approaches, like gradually reducing government spending, returning to balanced budgets, and shifting away from this whole debt-based financing model.
Those all sound great in theory, but in practice, it seems like our government is addicted to spending and debt.
It is a systemic problem, and the book doesn't try to sugarcoat it. It argues that we have to break free from this addiction if we want a truly stable and sustainable economic future.
Okay, so we stop the money printing, we redefine the dollar, and we tackle the debt. What about the banks themselves? How do they function in this new system without a central bank controlling everything?
The book proposes a pretty radical shift to what it calls honest banking,
Honest banking.
where banks are required to hold 100% reserves against demand deposits.
100% reserves, so if I deposit $100 in a bank, they have to keep all $100 on hand instead of lending out $90 of it.
That's the idea. They could still make loans, but only with time deposits where customers agree to leave their money in the bank for a specific period.
So no more creating money out of thin air. Banks would actually have to possess the money before lending it out. It sounds a lot more stable, but is it realistic? I mean, wouldn't that make it much harder to get a loan?
That's a common criticism. Critics argue that this would stifle economic growth, making it harder for businesses to access capital. They say that without fractional reserve banking, the economy would grind to a halt.
So it's a trade-off, stability versus potential growth.
That's the dilemma. The book acknowledges that there would be a period of adjustment, a transition. It even calls it the hangover,
A hangover.
like detoxing from an addiction to easy money and central bank intervention.
So it's not going to be easy.
No, we wouldn't be painless. But the book argues that this hangover is unavoidable, whether we choose to address the problem now or later.
So better to just bite the bullet now.
Exactly, than to kick the can down the road and make the eventual consequences even worse.
Okay, so what does this hangover period actually look like?
The book suggests it would involve some economic disruption, some volatility as the markets adjust. But it emphasizes that it would be temporary. Once the economy adapts to a sound money system, it would experience renewed growth and prosperity, free from those artificial booms and busts engineered by the Fed.
So it's a rough transition, but the book argues it's worth it in the long run.
Exactly. It's about building a more stable and sustainable foundation for the economy.
The Creature from Jekyll Island presents a very different way of looking at money and banking. It really challenges a lot of the conventional wisdom.
It does. It raises questions about who's really in control of our financial system and whether that system is serving us or manipulating us.
It's a call to wade into the potential dangers of the current system and to start thinking about alternatives.
It encourages us to become more informed, more engaged, and to take responsibility for our own financial well-being.
Yeah, to really understand the power of money and to use that knowledge to create a better future for ourselves and for our communities.
So we encourage you to continue exploring these ideas, to research further, and to engage in these conversations about the future of money and banking.
It's a fascinating topic and one that affects all of us. So thanks for joining us for this deep dive into The Creature from Jekyll Island. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep